Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and this time I'm building the Haymaker fiberglass model rocket by Mach1 Rocketry. Now I've had several of these in build videos before, and if you want you can go back and look at those. One of the things I've found about these is that they are a good introduction to fiberglass rocketry. They're still fairly small, relatively inexpensive, but Mach1's business model is a little complex. So if you buy the kit, the base kit is just going to have the parts in it. If you want the decals, those are extra. If you want a fiberglass nose cone rather than a plastic one, that's extra. So if you get all these extra parts put on there, it actually can get fairly expensive. That being said, if you want to get into fiberglass rocketry, this is still probably one of the least expensive ways to do it. Now, one of the other things about these kits is they usually don't contain instructions, and I don't expect this one to be any different. Alright, so here are the decals that I ordered separately for the kit. And I'm hoping there's at least a parts list in here. Alright. That's our main body tube wrapped in paper. Okay. Now be careful when you're handling the fiberglass pieces, as there may be little fibers usually in the cut ends and edges that can get into your skin and cause a lot of irritation. Alright, and when we actually start putting this together, I'm going to be wearing gloves for most of the time. Alright, well there's our body tube. It is pre-slotted for the fins. Okay, that is just the parachute protector here, and they actually give us two of those. Alright, here's an 18mm motor mount tube. Now that's something else. Alright, so it says it flies on C to F motors. To my knowledge, the largest impulse class for 18 millimeters is a D class. You might find an E out there, but I don't know of any, definitely don't know of any Fs that will fit in an 18 millimeter motor tube. I do recommend that you fly this on at least a C, because it says it's lightweight, but for fiberglass, lightweight is not lightweight as in for paper and cardboard and wood and such. This is still going to be a heavier model than it would be if we were using cardboard. Alright, we have a 9-inch parachute. Now that seems small for a kit this size, and I think a lot of it is the design is dependent upon the resilience of fiberglass. You could certainly upgrade this if you wanted to, either through them or just get your own parachute. Alright, we've got a nice conical nose cone, micro rail buttons here, alright, a Kevlar shock cord, and here are the centering rings. Okay, we've got an engine clip, thrust ring, launch lug, and then our 3 cut fins. And again, I'm handling these kind of gingerly so I don't end up with fiberglass in my fingers. Okay, but it looks like everything that we need to build a rocket is here. Now the other thing that we'll be using here is a lot of epoxy. Okay, wood glue and white glue don't bond to fiberglass very well, and for the potential thrust and shear forces that are going to be on this model, cyanoacrylate is probably not the best either. Okay, so if you've never worked with epoxy before, I would suggest reading the instructions well and trying a few small batches to see how you mix it up. So I'm going to clear away most of this and we will get started. Now before we start building here, we're going to need to clean the fiberglass. And this can be done in a couple of ways. If you're at a bench top like I am and can't really put this into a sink or something, I use a solution of 40% alcohol, and you can use either ethanol or isopropanol, and then 2 roughly 16 ounces or half a liter of that. I just put in 2 drops of liquid dish detergent. Just generic stuff is fine. And then we can spray this. Now I prefer to spray it onto a rag or wipe or whatever we're using here. Alright, but you can fairly well saturate it and just wipe down the surface. Now note I'm wearing gloves here, not so much for the cleaner, but to make sure I don't get little slivers of fiberglass in my hand, especially working down in these cut areas. Now if you have access to a large sink or a bathtub, you can also do this by just putting some dish detergent in the water, get it all nice and foamy, and then just clean all of these and then rinse them with clean water or with alcohol. And then once they're dry, they're ready to go. Now for the inside of tubes, it'll be helpful if you have a brush. Okay, so something like this. So I just squirt the cleaner down in there. Alright, and then I'll use my brush here. Okay, and I can spray a little bit more down there. Now my paper towels are kind of getting soaked. But then I'll take and bring this to a sink a little bit later on to rinse it out. Okay, for the smaller parts here, you can just spray them and wipe them down. And you really don't have to do anything else with them. Alright, so I'm sure you don't want to watch me washing all these parts, so I'm going to do the rest of this off camera and come back when I've got them all done. I've finished cleaning all the fiberglass parts, and the main reason we do this is to remove any oils or other lubricants that are used in the molding process, and those could interfere with the epoxy that we'll be using later on. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is put the motor mount together, and for this we're going to need the motor mount tube there and a motor clip, and then we'll have our thrust ring and our centering rings here. Now, again, this rocket does not come with instructions, and so what I have done is put all of this into OpenRocket to simulate it, and that's where I'm getting a lot of the measurements that I'm going to give you here today. Okay, so first of all, I want to mark my tube here. On the inside of one end, I'm just going to write aft, so I remember that this is the rear of the rocket. And now I'm going to draw a couple of marks on here. So first of all, we're going to need a mark at 6.5 centimeters. And what that will do is give half a centimeter of engine overhang here. If you want, you could probably increase that a little bit, but I wouldn't do it by too much. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this up here at 6.5, and that's where my motor clip is going to be, and that way it'll overhang by half a centimeter there. Okay. Now the other mark I'm going to make here is at, let's see here, 1 centimeter. And this is where it will meet the body tube. So we'll have 1 centimeter of motor mount hanging out the aft end of the body tube there. Alright, now we need to cut a little slit here for our engine clip. And to do that, I'm going to use a triangular file here and just file into this. And this is part of the reason I've got paper towel down here. You may also want to consider wearing a dust mask so that you're not inhaling fiberglass dust. Okay, now when you get that about halfway through, you can try to use your hobby knife to press through there. That way you won't have, if you just file the whole thing, you're going to end up with a really big slot there that we don't need. Alright, what you need is about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch wide, and then this will pop in there if you have it the right size. Looks like I need a little bit more. That should be more than enough. Going to be a little stubborn here. There we go. Alright, and then we also have 2 rings here. Now one of the rings has some notches cut into it, and you would think that maybe that would be for this, for the engine clip. It's not. Those are actually for the I just lost it. Shock cord. There we go. Because the shock cord is going to wrap around this mount. Okay, so we're going to take this ring here and put it on the aft end, but you'll probably notice that's really tight, and it probably won't go on there. Well, maybe it'll go on there without anything else. Just enough. Okay, now if that does not go on, use a file and file a notch right here on the inside surface of that ring to allow it to clear the engine clip there. Alright, now before we put this in or glue it or anything like that, we're going to compare it to the body tube here. Okay, so if we're hanging out that far, what we kind of want to do here is enclose the slots. Okay, so I'm going to bring that ring up there a little bit more and compare it. All right, we're going to bring it up a little bit more. Okay, and here again I'm going to make sure my lines are lining up. All right, it's a little bit too far. What I am aiming for is to have the aft ring right at the edge of the fin slot there. Now the forward ring, ideally I would get it right here, but we'll also have the thickness of the shock cord to worry about there, and so I need to give it just a little bit more room. Okay, it looks like I can put this ring right on the engine clip there where it goes in, and that would be just enough clearance. Okay, so I need to open that a little bit more so that it will go over my engine clip. Here, just using the flat part of the triangular file to open up one of those notches. Okay, so I've opened that up a little bit. It still may not be quite wide enough. We'll give it a check here. Yeah. Try to get this where you can see it. There we go. Okay, so if I put that right about there, just where that clip goes in, alright, and now we compare this to our slots here. Alright, I'm going to have to bring that up just a little bit. It's going to be tight in there. And if necessary, I can slide this one back and bring it just a little bit, bring the tube just a little bit further in. So we've got a little bit of play there, but not a whole lot. Next we need the shock cord, which I've got here. And what we're going to do with this, after I get it all unraveled, is that this is going to go through this other notch, and we're going to wrap it around the engine tube there, just inside the forward ring. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm going to back this off again. I'm going to place the line there in that other notch, okay, the one that's not going over the engine clip there. We're going to put this back on, and right up to the engine clip, just right there. Alright, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to run this all the way around, so I need to get a little more. Okay, we want just enough to run around the circumference and meet up at the other end there. I'm not going to try to knot this because there's not a whole lot of depth room there. Alright, instead I'm going to make up some epoxy now, and then I'll use that to basically fill in around here to cause that to be embedded in the epoxy while at the same time holding that ring there. And then we'll also do this other ring as well. So I do want to make, since we've got, this is where we want it, we're going to make a little mark right here so I know where that ring goes. Alright, we're going to check it against here once more. I'm also going to take one of the fins and just stick it between these two. Alright, that shows a little bit of play in there, and so that should give us enough room for the shock cord. So I'm going to go make up a little batch of 5-minute epoxy, and then I'll be right back. Here I've mixed up some 5-minute epoxy, and if you don't have a lot of experience with epoxy, you might want to do smaller batches and do one part at a time, or even go to a longer curing time, like 15 minutes. Okay, what I'm going to do here, if I can do it fast enough, is I'm going to first of all go ahead and anchor the shock cord here. And so I'm just going to fill some epoxy all the way around here, trying not to get it on the outside of the ring there. Okay, and I'll also get the forward edge here. So that's got lots of strength. Now again, I'm using gloves not only for the fiberglass, but epoxy can result in allergic-like hypersensitivity reactions in your skin after repeated exposure, and so it's just best not to get it on you. Now if you do have to clean up epoxy, and I do have a little bit on my ring there that I need to remove, you can use rubbing alcohol for that as long as it hasn't cured yet. Okay, so that's that side. Now I'm going to come down to the other ring, and remember I drew a little line there. I'm going to back that off just a little bit. Okay, we're going to put epoxy all around the aft end of the ring. Now on this ring I'm not going to put any on the forward side so that it doesn't interfere with the fins. Okay, and I'm going to move that back to where it was. Okay, getting that pretty close to perpendicular. Alright, and then the last thing to do is the thrust ring. My shock cord's coming off, but I'll fix that in a minute. So for this, I'm going to put it on the outside of the thrust ring rather than down the tube, so that if there's any excess, it will push itself upward and not down into the motor mount. And we just need to push this down until it rests against the top of the engine clip. Alright, now let's see if we can get this back on. Alright, now you can see it's kind of gooey in here, and this is the drawback of epoxy. I'm going to use a little bit of rubbing alcohol first to just clean off my gloves here. And then I'm also going to use this to clean off the tops of the rings. Okay, one more time getting this up here. I think I'm just going to end up holding this until it starts to cure there. Whoop. Don't want that happening. Alright, so I'm going to hold this until that cure starts to set in, and then I'll be able to set it aside. We're going to let this cure for a good 15 minutes before we go on to the next steps. The epoxy has set. It's a little sticky yet, but it's not going anywhere. And so I've got another batch of epoxy ready for installing this into the body tube. Now before that, I'm going to take the other end of the shock cord and I'm going to pass it down through the motor mount here. And we're going to pull that all the way through. Just like that. Okay. Now this little bit down here was still having some trouble staying on there. So just as a little bit of reinforcement, I'm going to put just a little bit of epoxy right under this. Alright, and then we'll, as we pull this, alright, it'll be embedded there. And it doesn't have to look fancy or anything like that. It's just going to give us some extra anchoring. Okay, now we need to put this up inside the body tube. And to do that, I'm going to use a cotton applicator here. So if we put this against the rocket once more, this ring, we're going to want to pass through a ring of epoxy that's just at the slots there. Unfortunately, the fiberglass is translucent, so we can see this. So I'm just going to run this up. Alright, and I'm going to run that around inside there. And you can be pretty generous with this. Okay, if you get a little in the slots, it's not a big deal. Okay, so now I'm going to first of all slide this in partially, like this. Alright, and now I can bend it a little bit around, and while I'm doing that, I get some more. Now this may actually require the stick end of this thing. Break this off. Okay, now if we look through this, we also want to make sure that the shock cord, although that won't make any difference once it's in place, but mainly make sure the engine clip is in between two of the slots there. Alright, now, here's what I'm going to do that I usually don't. So usually we put glue inside the tube, but in this case I'm now going to put it on the ring. Alright, I'm going to leave just a little gap there at the clip. Okay, now I'm going to push this in. Now remember we made that mark there. So that's how much we want hanging out. And we also want to make sure that the slots are clear of the shock cord and also clear of the engine clip and that aft ring. Okay, so right about like that. Okay, we've got a little oozing out here. We'll clean that up. And here again, this is where a little alcohol helps. So anything that got on the outside here, we'll just clean up with the alcohol. Alright, anything trying to drip out, we will also clean up with the alcohol. Alright, now once again, we can let that cure. Again, probably for about 15 minutes or so before we go on to the next steps. The epoxy on the motor mount has set, and now I'm going to feed the shock cord back up through the motor mount here, so we can get it going back in its correct direction here. And this may require a little wiggling and shaking and such. If you have a lot of trouble trying to get that down, tape the end to a dowel and then run the dowel down. There, I've got it. The main thing is making sure that it doesn't get hung up on the motor mount clip inside. Okay, so that's looking good. Now for the fins, you can round these like you would balsa or other wood fins. Or you can bevel them however you like to do it. Just be careful, as if you're sanding these things, one, wear a mask, or two, do it wet sanding. And also be really careful of the edges. As you're sanding this, it can become sharp enough to cut through your glove and through your skin. The other thing I want to do is just do a quick dry fit here. Okay, just to make sure we didn't get any epoxy where we didn't want it. That looks pretty good. Okay, so for mine, I'm going to wet sand these and start off probably with some 100 grit sandpaper to get the shape, and then we'll use about 220 grit to then make it nice and round and smooth there. The tip and trailing edges here, I'm just going to give them a light sanding with 220 just to smooth them out and make sure we don't have little fibers hanging out. That's all going to get done off camera though. And keep in mind that it will fly without sanding. It just won't quite fly as high. I've wet sanded my fins here. It turned out I really didn't need the 150 or 100 grit to start the shaping. 220 wet dry sandpaper worked just fine to round off the edges here, and then just a few quick strokes on each of the other edges was enough to take off any material that we didn't want hanging there causing splinters. While I'm sanding, I'm also going to do the nose cone here. Now let's, if I can get this to focus. Alright, these nose cones are built in two halves in the mold, and it leaves a seam behind here. Now, some people just ignore this, but I'm going to go in and first wet sand this with 220 and then go up to 320. And then if I have any these troughs left here, if they're very deep, I will fill those with a plastic model contour putty like this one that you can fill those in with and then sand off again. This doesn't look very deep, so I think that'll all sand out. And I'll back to the wet sanding for this. My nose cone has now been sanded with 220 grit sandpaper where those seams were, and you can just barely see the seams left. And then I sanded everything with 320 grit to get a nice even finish here. And even if I didn't have the seams to get rid of, using that 320 grit sandpaper will help the spray paint to hold to this. It just gives it a little more tooth. Now anything that is left here, I'm going to be using a filling sandable primer as my first coat, and that usually fills in any of the little tiny defects and imperfections there. For now, I'm just going to set that aside. And I'm going to go glove up again and make up some more epoxy, and we'll start attaching fins. I've made up another batch of 5-minute epoxy, and again, if you're not as comfortable with using this in a fast manner, you can just make up little tiny amounts at a time to do each fin, or use a longer cure time epoxy like 15 or 30 minute. I don't recommend 30 minutes, it takes so long. Now, if you want to speed this up a little, I recommend 2 tools. One is this stand here. This is from Estes. I think it's like $5 for the thing. And that's just to keep this elevated so we can get to the fins easier. And the other is this. This is a fin alignment guide that's been 3D printed. I got it somewhere on Thingiverse. It's not too hard to find. And there are several companies out there that will do 3D printing for you or already have these made. So this is made for a BT50 tube with 4 fins. And before gluing this, I'll just show you. So once you got a fin in here, you can move this so that this little part catches, and that keeps the fin from coming out. And this means I can do all 4 fins at pretty much the same time. Alright, so for this, you want to be careful. You don't want to get too carried away with this, and I tend to do that. Alright, so we're going to get the root edge as well as the tab there, just with an even amount. Now, unlike using wood glue on a cardboard model, you just stick these in, and that's pretty much the end of it. Alright, now I haven't shoved that all the way on yet. Now we'll move this over a little bit. And as this gets heavier with more fins, it may try and flop its way out of there. We'll try to avoid that. Alright, now something to watch as these go on. You don't want gaps between the root edges and the body tube. Sometimes you'll get a little one and you can't get rid of it. We'll fill those in with fillets later on. Okay, and also try and keep the epoxy off the faces of the fins. Always seems to end up, I get a little bit on a glove that I don't notice, and then I get a epoxy fingerprint. Okay. Alright, so there we've got all the fins on, and I'm just going to move this into place to keep compression pressure on there. Alright, now if you just got a little excess poking out, I would just leave it alone. If you have a lot, take an applicator like this, so that one's kind of gooey there, and just smooth that in. We're not trying to make fillets at this time. We don't want to rush too many things at once. All right, but you can remove the excess. I think I'll leave those alone. Alright, so one last time here. Make sure that everything's making good contact. And then now I'm going to let this cure in an upright position that won't fit into the camera here. And we're going to give this a good 30 minutes to cure. And I'm going to come in about 5 minutes after this just to check and make sure that those fins have not creeped off. Now something else you can do, if you have this alignment guide, is put a rubber band around all 4 of the fins there, and that will help keep them compressed into the slots. If you don't have this guide, the rubber band can cause the fins to pull one way or another, and they won't remain straight. The epoxy on the fins has fully cured, and that's looking pretty good there if I can get it in focus. Okay, now we will put fillets in as well, but not until after we do the launch lug. And I should have actually done this before I put the fins on, but we still have room here. So I'm going to find a point here. It's halfway between 2 of the fins. And for the launch lug, I'm going to put it on the same side as my engine clip. All right, so first I'm just going to eyeball a point halfway between 2 of the fins there. And then I'm going to draw that up using my fin marking, or my tube marking guide here. Now for the launch lug, I figured this out in Open Rocket, where I picked a point that would be centered, or at least within the boundaries of the center of gravity when loaded with all possible weights of motors in here. So anything from a B to a full D. And that puts our launch lug at 10 centimeters. So that's going to be 10 centimeters from the base, which is going to mark right there. So when we take our launch lug and put it on here, no matter what motor this is equipped with, the center of gravity will fall within the length of the launch lug, and that should give it the most stability on the launch rod and less likely to break off. Now we'll apply this using epoxy as well. Placement of the rail buttons here is going to be a little bit different because they've got these really long screws, or at least long in comparison to the thickness of the body tube. And we don't want those to be sticking inside where they could get caught on the shock cord or the parachute, something like that, and prevent proper deployment of the recovery system. One of these, most likely, I'm going to put a hole into the centering ring in the aft portion here, and then attach the rail button at that point, as that gives us a nice solid backing behind there. The forward one is the problem. Okay, so if I wanted to keep one of the rail buttons still within the center of gravity, it's going to need to be up in here somewhere. Now what I may be able to do is just drill a hole there and just epoxy that screw in, cutting it off to a length that was less likely to get caught or to catch the shock cord in there. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put the launch lug on now, and the rail buttons probably after we get the fillets done. Here I've made just a very small amount of epoxy, and I'm going to apply that to the launch lug. Okay, and I'm going to stick this on. Now I'm using 5-minute epoxy so that I don't have to worry about this just dropping off while it's curing. Alright, then we're going to straighten that. I'm going to sight down the rocket, and what you should see is that the launch lug and the line and the body tube are all going in the same direction there, and that looks pretty good. Now I can see I slopped a little bit of epoxy that got on my finger. I'm going to remove that with some rubbing alcohol. once again, we're going to wait for glue to set. While I'm waiting for the launch lug epoxy to harden, I'm going to go ahead and prep the nose cone for painting. And so the first thing we need to do is just take out this little bit of flash if you have it present. Just make sure you don't cut this. Now, that's a really thin amount of plastic to hold the shock cord and parachute and everything. And what I'm going to do is I'll tie the shock cord to this, but then I'm going to put a loop in the shock cord just a little bit down from the nose cone, and that's where the stress is going to be. So that's where the parachute will attach. For now, I am going to tape this onto a stick. Okay, so I'm going to stick a stick up through the nose cone there, and then we're going to put some masking tape around here. It's okay if it gets up on the nose cone shoulder there. Alright, that's mainly just to keep it from spinning. And then we'll put some masking tape on the shoulder right at the edge. It still wants to move. A little more masking tape here. Alright, so I'm going to give this a couple of coats of filling sandable primer. And you can get that in most places that have spray paint, but it may be in the automotive section rather than the general paint section. So I'm going to go prime this, and then we'll come back when that primer is done, and by then hopefully I'll decide what color I want this rocket. The epoxy on the launch lug has thoroughly set, and now we're ready to put on fillets. Now this is going to be a little bit different than you would do in a cardboard model rocket where you can just run some wood glue on and smooth it in with your finger. We're still going to do that, but we have to do it with epoxy, and that gets a little more complicated. Something else I'm going to do here is mask off the fillets, so we don't just get epoxy running everywhere. And with a rocket this small, you don't have to do this, and in fact about half the time with these types of rockets I don't. But just to show you here, so we don't need really big fillets. I'm going to estimate these at about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch, and that's too small. You will want narrow masking tape for this, so the standard slightly more than 1/2 inch masking tape is actually too big. Okay, so we want something like that, and in fact this is so narrow that I'm just going to mask both of these fins at once. Alright, so the amount of epoxy that goes on the tube side there will be determined by this tape. And sometimes I'll make a ring around there, but again, this is so narrow in here that I don't think we're really going to have the room. You can also tape up the fins like this, so you don't have it just creeping up forever on the fins. Now, depending how quick you are, it is possible to do all the fillets at once. If you're new to this, though, don't try it. Because there's so many things that have to happen kind of right after one after another. And if you get caught where your epoxy suddenly decides it's going to set right in the middle of doing this, you're going to have problems. So if you're new to this, I would just do one fin at a time and do facing fins. So you would put a fillet here and a fillet here, and tape the fins if you want to. And then right at about 4 minutes, right before everything sets up, you'll pull the tape off. And that will leave behind some nice fillets. Now you can use a longer setting epoxy. That also means you probably only want to do one set of fins at a time. Alright, now checking out, I've got a nice even bead of epoxy there in the launch lug. If you want to get just a few more meters of performance out of this, you could go ahead and put in a fillet here. But as far as the strength goes, that should be fine. So I don't think I'm going to try and mask that off. I actually did a pretty good job of cleaning around that when we put it on. Okay, so we've got fins up here. How do I want to do this? I'm going to do it the slower way and just do these facing fins first, and then we'll go off camera after that and do the rest of them. Okay, but let me go make up some epoxy here and I'll show you what I do here. Now, most modern epoxies that you can get at your local hardware or hobby store can be mixed by volume or by mass. They have densities close enough for the hardener and the resin that you don't have to worry about it too much. Now if you're mixing up really big volumes, check with the manufacturer. Okay, so for 2 facing fins, that's going to require about 2 grams here. So I just mix 1 gram of each. And as long as you're within 10% of what your target, you're fine. If you do happen to go over with one or the other, just go back and add the opposite one, as long as you keep them proportional. Okay, so that's within my 10%, that's fine. We'll set that aside. You definitely want to have something protective down so you don't ruin your surface if you happen to drip some of the epoxy on it here. Alright, definitely wear gloves because we're going to use our fingers to spread the fillets here. And then you'll also want to have some rubbing alcohol on hand. So I actually keep this little squirt bottle here because it just gives me a handy dispensing bottle. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is run some epoxy along each fin. I apologize if you hear a lot of voices in the background. We've got 200 and something 5th graders visiting campus today. Okay, now the popsicle stick size is about perfect for this type of rocket. Alright, and you can shape the depth of your fillets by whether you hold the stick more flat like I am here. That's going to increase the thickness. If you want them a little shallower, keep the stick more perpendicular. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing to the facing one here. Alright, and then once again you can just smooth that in. Alright, and then for the final shaping, here you can take the alcohol Alright, wet the finger of your glove. And now you can do this just like you would with wood glue on a wood or wood and cardboard model. Okay, go ahead and get some more alcohol there. Shape it. And what the alcohol does is it keeps it from sticking to your glove, which gives us a smoother finish. Now I'm going to let this partly set for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll remove the tape. A little over 2 minutes has passed, and so now we can remove the tape. We don't want this to go the complete curing time. All right, so we want to have the epoxy just a little bit flowable yet, and that way the edges here where the tape was have just a little time to flatten out and assume a more natural shape against the body tube there. Okay, now here you can also check, see if you have any stray epoxy. Alright, if you do, you can take a tissue or paper towel moistened with alcohol and clean up anything that shouldn't be there. I think we're okay here, so I'm going to just let that cure. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing with the other fins as well. Okay, so just take your time. Once you take the tape off, give it about 5 minutes before you go on to the next fin so that the fillets don't ooze around. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and when we come back, we should be about ready for parachutes and painting and that kind of stuff. While we've been working on the fins, the nose cone has been drying after 2 coats of primer. And you can see here it's filled in most of those imperfections. There's a little bit of one right there. Okay, I am going to wet sand this with some 600 grit sandpaper just to smooth it out. I'm not going to worry about that one little divot that's left there. Most likely the paint will fill that. And I've decided, at least for the nose cone, that this is going to be silver. So after I do a little wet sanding here, I'm going to let this dry overnight, and then we'll start the painting tomorrow or the next day. Now, speaking of painting, if we look at the package there, and it's showing mostly a red rocket with silver or white highlights here. Okay, but if we look at the decal set, it's kind of the opposite. So it looks like they're doing mostly a silver rocket, and then a lot of the silver or white or gray, it's kind of hard to tell, gets covered up by these decals. Okay, so we've got red decals here that if you were to intersperse them over a white background would give you the roll pattern here. Same down in here. Okay, but for example, the Haymaker decal here, they're showing that as being white over a red background, and that definitely will not work here. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is painting the rocket mostly white or silver, and then we'll put the stripes and stuff over that. While I continue waiting for epoxy to set, I'm going to go ahead and assemble the parachute. Now, there's not a whole lot to be done with this, since it's already pre-strung and nicely edged here and everything. But to attach it, I'm going to use a snap swivel, because if you're to actually try and attach this to the nose cone, there's simply not enough room, for one thing, because the eyelet's so small, and it's also a really weak eyelet. I also just prefer using snap swivels because it makes it easy to change parachutes out. So for example, if you decide that this 9-inch parachute is not quite big enough, it's really easy then to just unsnap it from the shock cord and put a different parachute on. And since almost all of my parachutes have snap swivels, that's really easy to do. So to prepare this, we're going to loop all the shroud lines around one finger here. I'm going to do that again, so one of them got really twisted. Okay. Now one of them will get a little bit twisted just due to the geometry of this. Alright, then I'll hold the parachute in the center, and then I'm just going to move everything back and forth relative to each other until all of those corners are at the same level there. Okay, now I'm going to hold on to the shroud lines always with one hand or the other so they don't change relative direction. Alright, and I may actually need a bigger one. Yep. So the size of the snap swivel is mainly going to be determined by how squishy down that you can get those, and that's just not going to fit. So I'm going to get a bigger snap swivel in return. I found a bigger snap swivel, and if you've never used these before, you can find them at just about any place that sells fishing tackle. And one other thing I'm going to do here, and this I often do with larger parachutes, but since this has such thick shroud lines here, I'm going to do it with this as well. I'm going to put a piece of heat shrink tubing over the shroud lines. And you can get this at most hardware stores. I think I picked this particular one up at Harbor Freight. Alright, so I'm just going to grab all the loops once more like I had them. Okay, and one more time now I'm going to make sure that everybody's still the same length and where they should be. Alright, I'm going to move that up out of the way first of all. And now we're going to go ahead and put this through the swivel end. Okay, so the round end of the snap swivel. Alright, we're going to send our loops through that. And again, I'm holding on back here so they don't change length. Alright, now I'm going to take the entire snap swivel and move it up through the loops while I'm moving the loops downward like that. And then I'm just going to pull that tight. Now usually if I'm just doing this with a regular plastic parachute with carpet string thread and things like that, I would just put a little dab of glue on here. And you can do that if you don't have the heat shrink tubing. You don't even need to do any of that. The reason I do is because it's not very difficult for this to come loose again, and then we have changes in shroud line length and that kind of stuff. Alright, so once you get to this point, either put a little dab of wood glue in the knot to keep it from moving, or go ahead and move that heat shrink down over the knot. And you can even bring it over the loop of the snap swivel, just don't go past it there. And now you just need to heat this up. And you can use a heat gun. I usually just use a lighter. Just be careful you don't burn your fingers. Alright, and we want this on a low setting. Okay, and so we don't stick it under the flame. You put the flame beside the tubing here. And as it heats up, it shrinks diameter and conforms to whatever's inside of it. Let's see here. This is actually, could have used the next size down heat shrink tubing. I think this will do. Now the advantage of this over glue is if I do need to untie this, I can just take a knife and slit this open. Whereas if you've glued it, sometimes you can break the glue apart, but not always. And so this gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of replacing parachutes as well. Okay, so now when we get the shock cord mounted onto the nose cone, we'll put a loop behind it, and then this will simply open up. And you hook the loop in, close it up, and it's ready to go. Okay, so we're still waiting on epoxy at this point. My epoxy fillets have set, and overall they look pretty good. And I've drilled 2 holes in this. We're using a 3/32 bit, if I remember right. Okay, so these are just big enough for the screws for the launch rail guides to go through. This might be a little off. I may have to move it over a little bit. But the aft rail guide button here will the hole goes through the aft centering ring, so it's going to give us a nice anchor here. The one forward here, this is at 10 centimeters, the same as the launch lug. And this one, as I mentioned earlier, I'll probably have to shorten the screw so that it just barely projects in there, and we'll just hold both of those on with epoxy. I'm not going to do anything else with them now. I'm going to paint the rocket before we go on to adding the rail guides there. So at this point, I'm going to take this over to my fume hood and put some primer on it. The primer on the main body is drying. I just wanted to show here, this is the nose cone. This had 2 coats of filling sandable primer, followed by 3 coats of this metallic, they call it metallic silver. It actually looks more like aluminum to me. But this came out really well, and so I'll go ahead and peel the masking and everything off of this. And we're waiting for paint to dry, quite literally. Here's my rocket after a coat of white primer, and the primer had some problems. It was kind of sputtering and things and not going on evenly. So I'm going to wet sand this with some 400 to 600 grit sandpaper and hopefully bring some of those imperfections down. Once I do that, then we'll be able to start painting it. My paint is dry, and at this time we are ready for the decals. Now again, we can use the front of the packaging here as a guide, but you don't have to. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, my decals don't look exactly like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is start with these first 2, the actual Haymaker lettering and this long red band, and I'm going to apply those to the sides here that don't have the launch lug or the rail buttons there, or at least where they will go. Okay, so we'll go ahead and cut these out, and you can use either scissors or a hobby knife here. Hobby knife usually gives us a straighter edge and a cleaner edge. So we'll try that here. And you can use these grids as a cutting guide, at least initially. Alright, now for the ends here, I'm going to use scissors, and the reason for that is so I don't have sharp corners, which tend to peel more readily than if we kind of round them off here. Alright, and you'll also notice I've got a basin of water here that has just a little bit of dish detergent in, like 1 drop for that basin. And this is going to allow us to reposition the decals easier. Okay, so we'll go ahead and peel these. Oh, that's not good. Let's try this from the other side. Oh, I see. Okay. So these. Alright, so we need to peel these. And those. Alright. We have a problem. Okay, so these are meant to have the letters come off onto the clear part. And mine are just not cooperating here. Alright, so the idea is you pull the lettering off with the clear part, affix them to the rocket, and then you pull the clear part away. That leaves just the letters behind. Let's see if we can salvage this. And unfortunately, the adhesive on the Y here was doing its job a little too well. Okay, saved it. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is just quickly dip this in soapy water. Alright, and just remove the excess there. And that temporarily removes the stickiness of the adhesive. After it dries, it will be fine. Okay. Alright, so I'm using my launch lug here as a guide as to where this should be. So the H is more or less flush with that. We want this straight as we can get it. And that looks pretty good. I think I got it right the first time. Alright, so now we're going to squish these down. Okay, and now we carefully peel those back up. And they don't want to do it. Alright, if we need to, we can use some tweezers on those. Alright, and given, if your rocket is as finicky as these decals are, you might want to go without the soapy water. Press as much of the water out of those as I can to begin with. Okay, that was a little tedious, but we got it to come out. Which means now we should be aware of this problem so that the rest of these we can count on hopefully coming on easier. And we may not want to use the soapy water for all of them. Alright, so next I am going to do two of these shorter red ones here. And I'm going to put those in between the fins down at the aft end of the rocket. So first I'll just go ahead and take these off. Okay, so I think what we can do now is go ahead and peel this, and that's going to expose our red strip there. And now I'm going to peel that off so that I don't have to deal with the overlayer. That's really tight too. I think that would have been almost impossible we had kept that outer layer on. Alright, so now, like we wanted to do before, we're just going to put this directly on. Okay, that's a little bit tight there. I'm going to take off just a little bit of that. And also make sure I'm right at the aft edge. Don't think they took fillets into account when they measured these. Okay, and I've got like a millimeter hanging over the aft end there. Once this has adhered better, I'll just take my hobby knife and trim that away. Okay, and we're going to do the other one on the opposite side. Okay, so you get the idea here. This is actually going to take quite a little bit of time to get all these decals on, but they're all going to go in the same general idea here. So if you're using any of these here, those are actually individual characters, and so you'll want to leave the overlay on until you get it onto the rocket and then peel that back. Okay, so I'm going to go off camera here and put some more decals on, and I'll come back when I'm done. So here's what I ended up with for the decals. I put the Mach1s on the fins there. That came out looking really nice, actually. And I didn't use the water method on these. So these I just applied directly on, and that turned out to be much easier without having these retained by that overlayer. Now this is going to have to dry completely, and then I can trim it a little bit. Alright, but something I noticed, if in order to get the roll pattern that they had, where we had a big red stripe here, I should have put these on the opposite fins from where I did. Not a big deal. So what I ended up doing is just taking one of those red stripes here and making another wrap in addition to the black one. Okay, I didn't worry about the 50s. That just refers to the body tube type, and doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. Okay, so now if we put the nose cone on that. Alright, so here's our nice silver nose cone. That's how it's going to look finished. Okay, but we're not quite finished with it yet. We still need to put on the rail buttons, and I need to probably re-drill this one. It's definitely off-center there. So we'll do that and then epoxy those on there, and then we'll just connect up the recovery system and it'll be ready to launch. Here I've added a new hole, and that looks a whole lot straighter. It's not going into the centering ring, but that's okay. Now that's going to be way too long of a screw there. Alright, because this is going to go on like this. So there's a large flange here, and that's going to go like this, and then that goes in here. Okay, and we've got about a 3mm clearance. For this one, it will go all the way in, and we don't want it to go all the way in, so we'll probably make it about the same. Alright, so first of all, I'm just going to take and actually use the rail button as a guide, and I'm going to cut the excess off there. So here, make sure that gets into focus. I don't know if it is or not. Alright, but we've only got about 3mm there now. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the other one. Let's do this one more time. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to go off camera here and make up just a little tiny amount of epoxy to glue these in. Now this hole here that's left, once I've got the rail buttons in, I will probably fill that in with some gel super glue, and then I can use a little touch-up paint at some point, or maybe just put a little sticker on there, something to hide it. Okay, but I'll do that after I'm done with the rocket. Here I've made up just a small amount of 5-minute epoxy, and normally I'd wear gloves, but I kind of need the dexterity here working with these small things. So first I'm just putting a little touch of epoxy in the holes. I don't want it flowing all over the place. Okay, and then I'm going to take each one of these, dip the threads there in the epoxy, and just put those in. And it's okay if there's a little bit squishing out there. Okay, and the same thing on the other one here. Just a little bit, put that in. Now the main thing here is these are so tiny, it's hard to keep them straight and oriented. So what I'm going to have to do is just press in on them like this until that epoxy starts to set up. While the rail buttons are setting on the main part of the rocket here, we can finish things up by connecting the nose cone and the recovery system. Okay, so here, this came with it. This was our parachute protector, and so we need to thread that onto our shock cord first of all and just kind of get it out of the way. All right, now if this is really frayed here and you're having trouble with it, put a little bit of super glue on there and wipe it off right away. That'll stiffen it. I think we're going to be okay here. So we're going to put that through the eyelet and tie a double knot into it. And the main thing is keep the knot kind of on the bottom of the nose cone and not out to the side. Okay. Tighten that down really well. Okay, and then we're going to put just a little bit of super glue on that, just to keep the knot from unraveling. Okay, so just one right there. Alright, and then we're going to cut this back to about 1/4 inch, or about 5 millimeters there. Okay, and that's just so it doesn't get caught up on the shoulder. And here again we can use just a little touch of super glue to keep that from fraying out again. Alright, now I'm going to come down about, 20 centimeters or so, 8 inches. Alright, and I'm just going to tie a loop into the middle of the shock cord here. And this way the stress of the parachute opening is delivered directly to the shock cord and not to that little tiny eyelet there. Okay, and then we can take our parachute, and you can either directly tie it to this, or you can use the snap swivel like I've done here. Alright, and simply tie that on. Okay, now we'll move this through, get that reasonably close. Okay, so first go ahead and fold the parachute. And my current favorite way is to fold it in half like this, where we've got overlapping corners. So there's 2 corners there, 2 corners in the middle. If I move this up here, 2 corners down here. Okay, now we're going to pull these down. All right, now we're going to fold the corners onto the middle from both sides. Gives us kind of a kite shape here. All right, take your shroud lines about halfway and pull those as a loop up into the kite like this. Okay. If you have the snap swivel, it should be hanging out here. If you don't have the snap swivel, this part that you tied on should be about there. All right, then you're going to fold the 2 edges over to enclose the shroud lines, and then we're going to fold this over down into the corners like that. Okay, and then take our parachute protector here And you can either kind of stick it in the middle and burrito it upward, like this. Well, let me get that out of the way. There we go. Alright, like that. And then we put this into the aft end. Okay, so now go ahead and take all the excess shock cord here. You can just stuff it down inside. Alright, and since this is a fiberglass tube, zippering is usually not an issue at all. Okay, and if you haven't heard the term, zippering is when your shock cord pulls down and rips the tube open, kind of unzips it. It takes a lot of pressure to do that to fiberglass. Okay, now we're going to slide our little burrito of a parachute in here. Alright, and that should go in fairly easily. If it feels like it's getting caught on something, pull it out and try refolding and restuffing there. Alright, then get everything else inside. Alright, and make sure you don't get any shroud lines or shock cord caught in here. Now I can already tell that's going to be too loose. So if I turn this upside down and shake it, that nose is going to come out. So what we'll do here is just add a little bit of masking tape to the shoulder to give it a little more friction there. And you don't even necessarily have to start with a full circumference. I like to start with about a half, maybe 2/3 here. And then I can just add more on if I need to. Alright, that feels pretty good right there. Okay, so now it's not shaking off, but we should be able to just pull that right off like that without a lot of tension, which we can. Okay, so if we get this turned around here, alright, from tip to body to tail, there is our Mach1 Haymaker BT50. Okay, hope you had fun building this with me, and I hope you learned from my mistakes on the decals there. Have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.